Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, and thank you for sharing this time with me today. We will begin, as always, by opening our hearts and preparing our minds with our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it. I perceive it. And now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. The title of our devotion today is The Beauty in Mystery. And our affirmation is, today I am willing to say, I don't know. And that's beautiful. All right, so the text begins, there is great beauty in mystery. Life gets very boring when we get stuck in the same old stories we tell about ourselves and others. All right, time out before we move on from that sentence. We're going to talk about this more in depth in today's teaching. The importance and the impact of the stories we repeatedly rehearse with our own minds, as well as that we tell other people out loud. Back to the text. Life gets very boring when we get stuck in the same old stories we tell about ourselves and others, or when we create an atmosphere where we think we must know everything or as much as we can know beforehand in order to enjoy an event. So basically, this is saying that life gets boring when we don't allow any room for mystery. Whether it's because we're telling and believing the same old stories over and over, or that we feel we're not going to enjoy something that may be new to us unless we have a lot of information about it beforehand. And that's all our human need to control the situation, which leaves very little room for surprises. Many surprises are great. And even the ones that are not so great serve a purpose because they keep life interesting. And they put us in a position where we have to adapt and be flexible. And those are two excellent skills to have in life, adaptability and flexibility. We should always be working on refining those skills. Back to the text. Sometimes we just need to ask ourselves the question, what's the harm in not knowing? Okay, side note, sometimes you don't want to know what's coming. You know how they say sometimes if you're about to be in a car accident, the person who sees that it's coming and tenses up gets injured worse than a person who, that's why a lot of times, frankly, drunk drivers don't get hurt because they're not aware, so their body is more flexible with the impact. So I think that's the same thing. Sometimes we think we want to know what's coming, but we really don't, because when we're faced with it right then, sometimes our reflexes and how we handle it are better and less injurious when it just happens in the moment. All right, so, and if we really want to get philosophical, we can ask, why do we think of it as higher or better to know something than to not know it? So I alluded to this a bit on Sunday when our devotion was about the playful side of Jesus. Why do we think it's better to be serious than to be playful? Why do we think things that are important must be accompanied by frowns and heaviness and a sense of gravity rather than lightness and levity? I'll give you a hint. That's what we're going to be talking about in the teaching a little later on. When you get right down to it, needing to know or thinking knowing is better than not knowing is a very ego and fear-based way to live. We think the more details we know about a situation, the more we can control it. The same goes for our relationship with others. We pride ourselves on how well we know someone. But have you ever thought about it this way? When you define someone, you also confine them to the story of them you have created. And when you do this, you aren't really experiencing all of who that person is or allowing them to grow, change, or evolve. So doesn't that drive you crazy when someone does that about you? When you've worked really hard to make a certain change in your life, but then when you get around the people you've known for a long time, they don't recognize that and they just want to treat you like you've always been, and you want to say, but I've changed, and they don't really see it or they don't allow it. So if you don't like that being done to you, then don't do that to others. Learn to be open and leave a little room for the mystery of what you might not know about them or of who they have become since you last saw them. If you don't, you might be missing a beautiful opportunity. Okay, so here's our prayer for today. God of beauty, help me get comfortable with the mystery of life. Help me to allow others the room they need to grow and evolve into the fullness of all you have created them to be. Amen. All right, deep breath in. We're going to move on now to our special connection affirmation. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in thought, word, and deed. Amen. I'm going to segue into our teaching today by going back to a specific line in the text of the devotion we just read. It said, when you define someone, you also confine them to the story of them you've created. A few lines before that talked about having to know or thinking knowing is better than not knowing, and how that is a fear-based way to live. When we don't leave room for the mystery of life, this is what happens. We miss so much of life's beauty because we're so busy trying to control things that we're never going to be able to control anyway, no matter how much information we have. Fear always confines, restricts, and contracts. But love is its opposite, is always expands, sets free, and opens. So once again, I'm going to go back to our devotion from this past Sunday. This same dichotomy could be used to describe the words and the qualities of gravity and levity. Gravity is that force that pulls us down. Okay, like fear, it contracts, it restricts. A lot of times that's why as we age, we get actually physically shorter because our spine contracts. That's why our skin and other parts of our body start to sag, because it's the effect of years and years of that gravity pulling us down. So as I also said on Sunday, though, just to be devil's advocate, there is a certain element of protection and safety in that, because here on earth, in these physical bodies, we need the force of gravity to keep us from floating off into space. But that's only in and on this earthly human plane. That only applies to our temporary human form. I also pointed out on Sunday that when we think in spiritual terms, we must transcend this earthly realm and connect with or relate more to that part of us that is divine. So transcend, of course, means to go up, to rise. Another word for that is levitate, which comes from the same root as the word levity, which indicates lightness or laughter. So something that's comical is described as levity. So we've had it a little backwards all this time. If our goal is to move from the human or the natural to the spiritual and the divine, then we've got to move from gravity to levity, not the other way around. Spirituality is or should be associated with levity rather than gravity. Some people believe and therefore behave as if the more spiritual you are, the more serious you must be. And the demonstration of this is a sour look on your face. Have you ever encountered those people who, when they're praying or when they walk into the church, they think that the more sour they look, that means the more spiritual they are? There's no smiling allowed. You must be very solemn when you're spiritual because it's very serious business, right? Okay, nope. What does the Bible say? What does the Bible say our strength is? The joy of the Lord is our strength. Gravity and seriousness actually pulls you down and makes you weaker. What did Jesus himself say to the people who would follow him? Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So that sounds a lot more like levity than gravity to me, and I'm not sure how we got it so twisted, but we have. So if you truly want to be spiritual, the way to get there is not down the path of sacrifice and struggle and labor. It's through levity, rising above, or in other words, laughing and being happy. Now, this is not a new subject for us, but we're going to review and reiterate today the importance of being happy. So let's talk about it. First, I want to go back to some quotes. The first one, to be happy with yourself in the present moment while maintaining a dream of your future is a grand recipe for manifestation. That was Dr. Joe Dispenza. Next, by Ralph Waldo Emerson, for every minute you are angry, you lose 60 seconds of happiness. Okay, next, Gandhi said, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Next, it's not easy to find happiness in ourselves, and it's not possible to find it elsewhere. That was by a woman named Agnes Replier. Now, I've read that particular quote to you before, and I remember that the last time I gave it to you, I also gave you this example. I said, basically what this quote is telling us is that when your only choice is between something that's difficult and something that's impossible, you're going to choose difficult because that's your only choice. You actually have no other choice. Your only other option is impossible. So it's like you see this option and you think, oh, this is too difficult. Let me move on to the next one. And then when the next one comes up, it's impossible. And then you go, oh, well, maybe this other one wasn't so difficult after all. So it's difficult to find this quote is saying it's difficult to find happiness inside yourself, but the only other option and alternative is impossible because you can't find it outside of yourself. So if you want to be happy, you're going to necessarily go within because at least difficult is still doable. It's kind of like when you serve your kids something for dinner and they don't want it and you say, okay, well, you can go to bed hungry. So then it's amazing how much more tasty it becomes to them when that's their only option. All right. So the first quote today was by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he talks quite a bit about the progression of getting to a certain state and then holding that state steadily until it becomes a pattern in your life. So this is where telling stories comes in. He says, how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. Now here's the problem. If you don't know how to regulate or control your emotional reactions to certain events, which you would label negative, and you keep the negative emotion associated with the event going for an extended period of time, that emotion will literally produce a chemical change in your body. If you stay in this negative emotion for days, or maybe even a few weeks, it's called a mood. And when people ask you what's wrong, you say, I'm in a mood. Well, why are you in a mood? They will ask. If you answer truthfully, you will say, well, this event happened in my life 5 days ago, and I'm having one long emotional reaction to it. And the longer you're in a mood, the more people are going to ask you what's wrong. And the more you're going to keep retelling and thus reliving the story of the event. So it's already shifted from an event to a story. Okay, so remember earlier in our devotion, we talked about keeping ourselves and others trapped or locked into certain stories we've created. And this literally affects us physically. The more you tell the story, the more chemicals the emotion of that story is creating in your body. And then your body actually becomes used to those chemicals. That's funny, I almost said criminals, which they are. Your body becomes used to those chemicals and starts craving them. Okay, this is how we've talked about before. We get addicted to stress because we're just so used to it. Our body doesn't know how to function if we don't have a certain level of it. So that when you wake up in the morning, the first thing your body starts to look for in order to feel normal are those stressful chemicals. So if this goes from lasting for a few weeks to a few months, the mood becomes a temperament, and the bad mood turns into an angry temperament. And people will then ask you, why are you so angry? And again, if you answer honestly, you'll say, well, this thing happened in my life 8 months ago, and I'm still having one long reaction, emotional reaction to it. By this time, the chemicals your body is producing associated with this event that has become a story, this mood that has become a temperament, is these chemicals are causing your body to memorize a state of negativity and anger and unhappiness. If this keeps going for a period of years, it moves from being a temperament to a personality trait, and then it is essentially a huge part of who you are. So wow, let's just take a breath and let that sink in. So now we see how that process works, it's fairly depressing. But the good news is that we know that if your body can produce these chemicals that that create negative patterns, all you have to do is reverse the process, and it can also help you to create positive patterns. And this premise of Dr. Joe Dispenza's that we've just gone over is going to help us know how to do that. If retelling a negative story over and over creates a negative pattern, which results in chronic unhappiness, then it's only logical to assume that replacing that story with a positive one will create a positive pattern resulting in happiness. And so have you ever come across people like that when you get in their presence or when you begin a phone conversation with them, the first thing they want to tell you is everything that's going wrong? And then maybe you're in the presence of when a new person comes in, and what do? Every time a new person walks in, let me tell you, and maybe they sit down and they grab your hand so that you can't get away from them. They look right in your eyes, and you have to just sit there and listen to their story that you know they've told every other person that's come into the room. So that's a choice we make to do that. Or we can choose to say, you know what, I'm good. This happened, but I'm moving on. And that it's surprising how much difference that can make in your the chemical reaction that you have in your body. So a while back I did, over the years I've done a couple of different teachings on happiness, parts of which, as I said, we're going to review and reiterate today. One of them was called Practicing Happiness, which fits right in with what we're talking about today. So I'm going to go back to some information from that. So a lot of people think that happiness is something that's hard to come by, that it's rare, or that it's random, reserved for only a few lucky people. But we'll see today that happiness is not something that comes already ready-made. It comes from it's the result of our actions, our choices. It comes through practice. Happiness is not something we find or just stumble upon. Happiness is something we can create and cultivate. So I'm going to read now from a piece called Happy for No Reason by a woman named Marcy Shimoff. She says, happiness, it's the one thing everyone everywhere wants, and it has been since the beginning of time. Everyone's definition of happiness is different, but most of us base it on either our possessions or our circumstances or some combination of both, which means the focus is always on the external. We think something external will ultimately bring us the fulfillment that we want, but it's not working. We have an epidemic of unhappiness in our society. Though we have more than ever materially, 1 out of 4 adults in America report that they are unhappy with their lives. Recent advances in science show us that happiness is more than a simple feeling. It is a state of being that encompasses our mind, our heart, and even our cells. And it is not dependent on reasons. Okay, so here's one of our first keys and clues. Happiness, she's saying, is more than a feeling. It is a state of being. So we've got to get there through our choices, through our practicing, consciously saying, I'm not going to tell this story again. I may tell it once or twice or whatever, but then I'm just going to let the story go and say I'm good. And the more you say you're good, the more you will be good. And stay there until we be there. All right. Science is actually cracking the happiness code now, and it turns out that anyone can become happier if they want to, regardless of their external circumstances. So that was some information there that we already knew, that it's not anything external that determines your happiness. Happiness is always an inside job. We've talked about that before. And we've also talked about before about how our emotions affect our physical health. But what may be new information is the fact that you don't necessarily have to have a reason to be happy, and that happiness is a skill that can be cultivated. All right, so going on with this. Studies show that each of us has what is called a happiness set point. Okay, I love this. We've talked about this study before, but I love it, which is a fixed range of happiness we tend to return to throughout our lives, no matter what our external circumstances are. Just like our body has a natural fixed range of weight it likes to stay within and return to that can only be changed through physical effort. Okay, so did you know that about your body? I really didn't know that before I read this article, that there is a range of about 15 pounds that it naturally likes to stay in. And so if you want to go below that, if you want to lose more than that, or if you want to gain more than that, that's rare that people want to gain weight, but some people do, then there has to be some effort involved. You either have to, if you're wanting to gain weight, you've got to eat more heavily caloried foods. If you want to lose weight, then you have to put in some physical effort and watch your diet as well. So there's this range they're talking about physically that your body just naturally likes to stay within if you do nothing. And if you want to go outside that range, either side, there's going to be some work involved. So the good news is this range, just like our physical weight, can be changed. In the same way you'd crank up the thermostat on a chilly day to get to a comfortable temperature, you can learn to raise your happiness set point. What we have learned about our happiness set point, which is how we feel on average most of the time, no matter what happens to us, is that only 50% of it is controlled by genetics, okay? So, which is the actual level of chemicals your body naturally produces, like serotonin and dopamine, which, are called the feel-good emotions or chemicals. So that's 50% of it. Then 10% of what controls our set point is our life circumstances, the things that happen to us. The remaining 40% is what we have to work with. And this is where we can focus on intentional activities that will either raise or lower our natural happiness set point. An example of how the happiness set point works is people who win the lottery, which many of us think is the golden ticket to happiness. However, statistics show that 1 year after winning the lottery, most people return to the same level of happiness they had before they won the lottery. That was so interesting to me. The same is true on the other end of the spectrum. After having a negative experience, such as your car being broken into or losing your job, 6 months to a year later, no matter how bad things get, people tend to return to the same small range of happiness that they fell into before the event. This is the zone where our happiness level naturally resides. All right, so this is the zone that is comprised of that 50% that's genetic and that 10% that's due to circumstances. So we still, though, have 40% that we can intentionally work with to use to raise our happiness set point, or if we choose to, like I said, keep telling the same old sad story, lower it. Here's some information about this from a brain specialist whose name is Dr. Richard Davidson. He says emotions like happiness should be best regarded as the product of skills that can be acquired and then trained. So we can train our brain. People have a general perception that the emotional aspects of our personality are very different from other aspects of ourselves, like our physical skills, but they are actually very similar. Just like you can't exercise for 6 months and expect the benefits to remain for the rest of your life, you can't work on cultivating happiness for only a short period of time and expect it to make a permanent change. Both these things require consistent attention and need to become part of your overall lifestyle. So, it is possible to change our brain, and we do this by changing our habits. Raising our happiness set point is based on changing our thoughts, habits, and behaviors, and doing this consistently. The reason it is so important that we learn to do this now, at this particular point in human evolution, is that we're still working to overcome that part of our nature that predisposes us to look for the negatives around us and to focus on what could potentially go wrong or bring us unhappiness. In humanity's past, the article says, this was a mechanism we developed to keep ourselves physically safe. Back when civilization was more primitive, it was important for humans to be able to very quickly assess what level of threat a new person coming into their environment or a new situation they found themselves in posed to them and to their community. The problem with this type of chronic stress in today's world is that it makes sense only if you're living in an environment where being on this level of red alert is actually a matter of life and death, a matter of your survival, and not the response to things like traffic jams, okay? So repeated exposure to this level of stress and the negative emotions associated with it build up in the brain, thus generating the feeling of unhappiness and negatively impacting the physical body. So side note, this is why I rarely watch the news anymore. I think that something happened to America. A shift began to happen to our happiness set point collectively when every restaurant you walk into, every airport, a lot of stores, everywhere you go publicly where there's a TV monitor, what is it always on? CNN, Fox News. And it's just this constant, even if it's subconsciously in the background, you're just constantly being fed this stream of how horrible things are. So what do you think's happened to our happiness generally? It's gone down because that's what we're focusing on. That's what we're letting in. In order to offset this, we need to use that 40% that is within our control to create happiness that can be experienced regardless of our external life circumstances. As has been discovered, we can do this by practicing happiness habits. And so now they give 7 habits that will help us to accomplish this. We're going to go through them quickly. Happiness habit number 1, take responsibility for your own happiness. So we all know we're supposed to do this, but it's always good to be reminded. The most effective way we can take responsibility is by not allowing ourselves to blame others for our personal well-being. When we do this, when we start blaming others, we give our power away and we immediately become the victim. Sometimes blame in the short term, especially in the aftermath of an overwhelming event like a car accident, is useful in the immediate. The problem with blame comes in when we stay in it for too long. It is not useful as a long-term strategy. So again, we always talk about it's good to realize sometimes why you have some of the issues you have. When you can look back and say, oh, it's because this happened to me, or it's because my parents told me this. But once you can recognize it, then it's your responsibility not to stay in it, but to change it somehow so that you come out of it. Once you recognize it, then there's no more need to keep rehearsing it. The only way you're ever going to have a successful life is to feel like you are able to cope with things well. And once you get stuck in blaming others or blaming your circumstances, it is the equivalent of admitting you can't cope. Changing your perspective is one of the touchstones of raising your happiness set point. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can always take responsibility for how you respond. Even in the face of challenge, difficulty, or tragedy, it's possible to make choices that will lead you to greater levels of peace and well-being. So basically, this is the living out of that axiom. When life gives you lemons, or i.e. something sour, you make lemonade, okay? You make the best of it. Or, as our friend Dr. Kim Duramo always says, pause and ask yourself, what else is possible here? What's right about this situation, or what's good about this that I'm not seeing? Remember that famous story of the little kid who is found on Christmas morning digging through a huge pile of manure with a huge smile on his face, and people are saying, crazy little boy, why are you smiling? You're in a big pile of you-know-what. And he looks up and says, with all this crap in here, there's got to be a pony down there somewhere. So that's taking the 40% that you have to work with and being responsible for what you do with it, for how you perceive it. All right, on to happiness habit number 2. Practice forgiveness. Forgiveness is like spring cleaning for your heart. It gets rid of stuck emotions and frees up energy that can now be used in the healing process. The practice of forgiveness allows you to make peace with your past and move on from painful situations. Happiness habit number 3. Focus on gratitude. People who experience happiness for no reason don't necessarily have more in their lives to be grateful for than others. They simply focus more of their time on gratitude throughout the day. A very easy way to do this is to start keeping a gratitude journal. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be as simple as writing down 3 things you're thankful for before you go to bed every night. All you have to do is change the ratio of what you're attending to or being aware of in your life. Consider how much time you spend each day focusing on what's wrong in your life as opposed to what's going right or things that you're grateful for. What's the ratio? Is it out of balance towards the negative? If so, you can train yourself to begin registering the positive aspects of your life through a variety of practices. A good thing to remember is what we were talking about earlier. We are predisposed through the evolution process of humanity to register and remember negative experiences more than positive ones, because negative experiences are what threaten us, what threaten our survival. So we have to consciously decide to spend more time than we just automatically would registering and remembering positive experiences. Science shows us we need to hold a positive experience in our mind for at least 10 to 15 seconds in order for it to really register in our memory. So as I said, this happens automatically with negative experiences, but it doesn't, for whatever reason, with positive ones. So we have to consciously make the decision to make that happen. Happiness habit number 4. Don't believe everything you think. So what does my brother always say? You are not your thoughts. You are the being capable of thinking the thoughts. We talked earlier about our happiness set point and how 50% of it is determined by genetics, the actual level of certain chemicals and hormones that our body naturally produces that come from the DNA we got from our parents. And then 10% comes from life circumstances, the things that happen to us that we have no control over at times. But then that 40% that we can control is largely determined by how we think, and we've got to come to the conclusion that we get to decide what we think about. Our thought life is not this random, out of control thing unless we allow it to be. So what does the Bible tell us to do? Take every thought into captivity. That's not always easy, and it takes practice. It's difficult, but it is doable. All right. Happiness habit number 5. Practice meditation and mindfulness. This is something that will help us to stay in control of our thought life. So obviously, we've talked about that before. Prayer, meditation, mindfulness, just checking out sometimes and being still and quiet, getting in touch with your inner self, with your source, with your higher self, makes all the difference in how you are able to more easily control your thoughts. Happiness habit number 6 is live a life inspired by purpose. Richard Nelson Bowles says that your mission in life is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet, which means if you can find the area where people are hungry for what you love to give, then you have found your purpose. When you are there doing whatever it is, everything else in your life seems to fall into place, and the universe starts to cooperate with you. So that means do what you love to do, and then go find those people who want what you're giving. Then that's the perfect cooperation. You're happy, they're happy, it's a win-win. And then he's saying that then everything else in your life will just kind of start to fall into place, and you will be happy more often if you can figure out how to do that. Finally, happiness habit number 7, cultivate nourishing relationships. Okay, I think on Sunday my brother talked a little bit about this. It's okay to avoid certain people. Like I said, that person that's always got to grab you and sit you down and with a frown on their face and tell you about the latest horror they have experienced. It's okay to avoid those people because that is not cultivating a nourishing relationship for you. Having good relationships is one of the strongest predictors of happiness. There was a study done that included research on a tribe in Africa that had no access to television, no internet, not even any electricity. Their homes were made from dung, okay, what we were talking about before. Most people would not consider that an environment that's especially conducive to creating happiness. But the research showed that their happiness level was not substantially lower than people on the Forbes 1000 list, which I'm assuming are the 1,000 richest people in the world. One thing that was noted about this tribe was that they had very strong family and social connections. So people's level of happiness is clearly not determined by money. Some of the saddest people I've ever met are people with a lot of money. You know, for a while, my husband had a side job where he got people who had lost their luggage in the airlines. The airlines would give it to him and he would take it to their houses. And he said it was really interesting that the more well-off the people seemed to be, the nicer the neighborhood was. He said, first of all, when they opened the door, they were grumpier. They were, finally, my luggage, and that they were the worst tippers, and that the people in the more modest neighborhoods were always thank you so much, and were the biggest tippers. So that right there shows you money doesn't have anything to do with your level of happiness. It's the relationships we have in our lives, much more so than how much money or fame we have, that determines our happiness. And here's another reason our relationships are important. Have you ever heard about something called social contagion? Social contagion is the transmitting of an idea or of an emotion from one individual to other individuals. That's why sometimes that's how mobs form, okay? Because a couple of people are angry about something. Well, other people around them may just be minding their own business, but somehow that anger starts getting transmitted, and that's how mobs form. On the other hand, that's how those atmospheres happen at concerts where everybody gets happy, maybe just because the couple of people start doing something nice or fun, and everybody starts joining in. It's called social contagion. Nobody really knows the mechanism by which this happens, but it's suspected that it has a lot to do with our brain and heart waves. The more strongly you feel something and the more consistently you hold a certain feeling, the more likely it is that you'll pass that feeling on to those around you. For this reason, it's important to surround yourself with people who are generally happy and who support your happiness. It's been said that we become the average of the 5 people that we associate with most. So it's important to pay attention to how nourishing the relationships are that surround you. All right, so there they are, the 7 happiness habits. And here's a quick review. Habit number 1, take responsibility for your own happiness. This is the starting point of how we avoid victimhood. Habit number 2, practice forgiveness. In order to be happy, you have to practice the conditions of happiness, among which are compassion, tolerance, mercy, and forgiveness. And forgiveness is basically just making peace with your past and everyone and everything in it for your own sake. Habit number 3, focus on gratitude. Learn to concentrate more on what you have, on the things about your life that are good, and less on what you don't have and the things about your life that you don't like. That's simple math right there. Habit number 4, don't believe everything you think. Learn to question your thoughts. Instead of accepting facts as absolute, look at them as statements that are true in some contexts, but not true in others. When you accept facts as absolute, you are setting yourself up to be mindless and to be wrong. So being mindless is the opposite of being mindful. We've been taught these things are good and these things are bad, not taking into account the context. But context matters, and thoughts depend on it. So we should always question our thoughts and not just accept them as truth blindly or mindlessly. Every story can be told from either the viewpoint of the victim or the hero. It's the same story. The difference is which perspective you're telling it from. So the story you tell comes directly from your own thoughts. Habit number 5, practice mindfulness and meditation. You don't have to just accept the 60% of your emotional makeup that comes through your DNA and your life experience. You can change that set point of your emotional life through the consistent practice of intentionally working with that 40% that you are responsible for. Habit number 6, live a life inspired by purpose. Find your zone, that place where people need what it is you love to give, and then you'll start experiencing more and more happiness. And finally, habit number 7, cultivate nourishing relationships. So these 7 habits are a good start toward rising above or levitating away from the gravity of all the earthly cares and concerns that only weigh us down and keep us trapped in our old story. And which most importantly is temporary, okay? That gravity, we only need gravity temporarily when we're in this human form. I talked to you some years ago about that line in the Declaration of Independence that says, the pursuit of happiness is a God-given, unalienable right. But if you read that closely and understand it correctly, it doesn't say that we are guaranteed happiness. It says we are guaranteed the right to pursue it. Now, what does that word pursue mean? Many people think it means to chase something or to run after something. Like I said in the very beginning, many people view happiness as this set thing that you have to stumble upon. But the word pursue also has an archaic meaning, which I think is closer to what the founding fathers, the writers of the Declaration of Independence, were talking about. That definition is to be engaged in, to participate in, to work at or practice, to persist or stick with, like when someone describes something as a noble pursuit. So, to pursue happiness does not mean to chase after some elusive goal we may or may not reach. Rather, it means to put it into practice, to engage it, to participate in it, to persist with it, to work at it. So there's no better line to end today's teaching with there's no better line to end with today, this teaching, than get happy and see what happens. We know it, but now we have to live it. We have to walk it out. We have to practice it. So that is what I want us to concentrate on this week. Amen? Amen. Let's stand up and sing our song. Tomorrow night, we will still be having the online study. Pastor D.E. explained in the devotion on yesterday morning, and he asked me to say it again. Last week, they were in Florida, and so because of the internet connection, it was a little glitchy. I know it was when I didn't know if it was just my TV, but apparently everybody, it was really glitchy going in and out. So we didn't really get the full teaching from last week. So since he's not going to be in town tomorrow, he and my mother and Pastor Brandy are going out to Tulsa in the morning to spend a few days with Bishop Pearson. So we're just going to replay in its full form last week's teaching so that everybody will have the benefit of getting that before we go on. So that'll be tomorrow night at 6:30, but then we will do the live devotion Friday morning at 7 a.m., and then we will also see everybody next Sunday at 10 a.m., either here or online. All right, Benny, let's sing.
Blessed always,
Blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Blessed always, blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say Amen. Have a great week. I love you. Be at peace.